Mr. Donald was very excited as he approached the Grand Palace. The palace was known all over the world for its tall towers, shining windows, and huge gardens filled with colorful flowers. Birds were flying above, and the sunlight made the palace look golden. Mr. Donald had always dreamed of visiting such a place. He had seen pictures on television, but seeing it in real life was completely different. Everything was bigger, brighter, and more impressive than he had imagined. He walked slowly along the long stone path leading to the main entrance. His eyes were wide open, looking at the tall walls and the beautiful carvings on the gates. Tourists were already walking around, taking pictures and talking quietly. But Mr. Donald was focused on something else. He wanted to see the royal guards who stood in perfect lines near the palace doors. He had seen them many times in books and videos, always standing still, looking serious and never moving no matter how many people passed by. He liked the idea of order and discipline. As he reached the front of the palace, he stopped and looked at the guards. They wore tall hats, shiny shoes, and uniforms that were neat and clean. Their faces were serious and their eyes stared straight ahead. Mr. Donald remembered how, in his own world, people often saluted him when he entered a room. He imagined that here, the guards would do the same. He straightened his back, lifted his hand, and waited for a salute. The nearest guard, Thomas, did not move. He stayed perfectly still, looking forward. Mr. Donald thought maybe Thomas had not seen him, so he raised his voice a little and said, "Salute me." Thomas still did not move. He remained as steady as a statue, his eyes fixed on the distance. Mr. Donald frowned and tried again, this time smiling and waving. Nothing happened. The other guards around Thomas stayed just as still, creating a perfect line of discipline. Some tourists stopped to watch. They whispered to each other, pointing at Mr. Donald and the guard. A few tried to hide their smiles, finding the situation a little funny. Mr. Donald did not like being ignored. In his mind, he was very important. He had visited many countries, met many leaders, and people often noticed him immediately. But here no one moved. It felt strange to him. Just then a guide came closer. Her name was Maria, and she had worked at the palace for many years. She had seen many visitors misunderstand the rules of the guards. She smiled politely at Mr. Donald and said, "Sir, these guards only salute the king or follow his orders. They do not salute anyone else." Mr. Donald was surprised. He had not expected that. In his world, people often followed him automatically. Here it was different. He looked at Thomas again. The guard's posture was perfect. Not a single movement, not even a blink in response to Mr. Donald's gesture. The silence of the palace felt strong and serious. Mr. Donald realized that this was not his place to command. The rules here were very clear. Guards did not salute because someone asked them. They followed a tradition that was hundreds of years old. Mr. Donald took a deep breath. He realized that getting angry or insisting would not help. The guards were trained to be patient and disciplined. He felt a little embarrassed but also curious. He wanted to understand more about this place. Slowly he smiled and lowered his hand. Maria noticed his change in mood and nodded. She could tell he was starting to learn a small but important lesson about respect and patience. As he looked around, Mr. Donald began to notice more details. The walls of the palace had beautiful paintings of kings and queens from the past. The gates had delicate carvings of flowers and animals. The sun reflected off the polished stones, making the place look magical. Mr. Donald realized that the palace was not only about power or authority. It was about history, culture, and tradition. He decided to continue walking and explore the palace. Even though the guard had not saluted him, he felt a new sense of respect for the rules and the discipline he saw. It was a different kind of admiration, not for himself, but for the palace and its people. He realized that this visit could teach him more than he had expected. The day was just beginning, and he was ready to enjoy everything the palace had to offer. After realizing that the royal guards would not salute him, Mr. Donald decided to keep walking and explore more of the palace. He felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The palace was not just a building, it felt alive with history. Every corner seemed to have a story. The walls were decorated with paintings of past kings and queens, showing their lives, celebrations, and important events. He noticed the colors in the paintings were bright even after many years, and the details were very clear. It felt as if the people in the paintings were looking at him silently. As he walked, he kept glancing at Thomas, the guard. Thomas was still standing straight and still, his face serious and focused. Mr. Donald remembered what Maria had said. The guards only followed the king's commands. He realized that no matter how important he felt, he could not change the rules of this palace. That thought made him smile a little. He had expected a reaction, but instead he found order and discipline that were far stronger than any commands he could give. Maria noticed his interest and began to explain more about the palace. "These walls have seen many generations," she said. "Every painting tells a story of our people, their courage and their respect for tradition. The guards are trained to remain disciplined, and their loyalty is only to the king. It is not personal. It is their duty." Mr. Donald listened carefully. He was impressed by the dedication and training of the guards. In his world, rules were sometimes flexible, but here rules were clear and strong. He began to understand the difference between authority and respect. As they moved further, they reached the palace courtyard. It was huge, with a fountain in the center and flowers arranged in perfect patterns. The water sparkled in the sunlight and birds flew around, landing gently near the fountain. Mr. Donald paused to look at the beauty of the place. He realized that the palace was not only about power, but also about creating something magnificent that people could admire. He felt calm and happy walking through this peaceful space. Tourists around him were taking pictures and asking Maria questions about the palace. Some of them looked at the guards with curiosity, trying to see if they would move or react. Thomas and the other guards remained perfectly still, not reacting at all. Mr. Donald found this interesting. In a way, it made the palace feel more special. The guards were not just standing there for show. They were part of a system that had been followed for many years. He could see how much respect people had for this tradition. Mr. Donald decided to try a different approach. Instead of giving orders, he started asking Maria questions about the history of the palace. He wanted to know about the kings, the ceremonies, and the festivals that were held there. Maria was happy to explain everything. She told him about a grand festival where the king would greet the people from the balcony, and the entire palace would shine with lights and decorations. Mr. Donald listened carefully, imagining the festival and feeling amazed by the organization and beauty of it. As they continued walking, Mr. Donald noticed small details he had not seen before. The doors were carved with intricate patterns, each one telling a story of a hero or a wise ruler. The windows had glass that reflected the sunlight in colors like a rainbow. He stopped near a corner where a statue of a past king stood. The king looked brave and calm at the same time. Mr. Donald thought about how different this palace was from any place he had visited before. The discipline, the beauty, and the history all worked together to create something extraordinary. He looked back at Thomas once more. The guard's eyes were still straight ahead and his posture was perfect. Mr. Donald smiled and nodded politely. This time he did not expect a salute. He understood that some things were not about him. Respect and tradition could not be commanded. They had to be appreciated. He felt a sense of humility he had not expected, and that made the visit even more meaningful. With every step, Mr. Donald became more interested in learning and observing. The palace was teaching him patience, respect, and the value of following rules. He realized that this visit was not just sightseeing. It was an experience that could change the way he thought about leadership, order, and admiration. He felt excited to see what else the palace had to offer as he continued walking, ready for new lessons and discoveries. Mr. Donald continued to walk through the palace grounds, feeling more curious and relaxed than before. He had learned that the royal guards were not like people he was used to giving orders to. They followed strict rules and only obeyed the king. This made him think about discipline in a new way. He realized that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned or naturally followed. For the first time that day, he felt that the palace was teaching him something important. The next area he reached was the palace hall. It was huge, with a high ceiling decorated with golden patterns. Chandeliers hung down, sparkling in the sunlight that came through the tall windows. The floors were polished so well that they reflected the walls and the people walking. Mr. Donald took a deep breath and looked around in awe. He noticed the paintings on the walls, showing kings and queens in bright clothes holding symbols of power. Some paintings were of celebrations, while others showed serious moments of decision. He felt as if he had stepped back in time. As he admired the hall, he noticed Thomas, the guard, standing perfectly still near a doorway. Mr. Donald could not help but watch him. Thomas's posture was exact, every movement controlled, every expression calm. Mr. Donald smiled and waved again, but Thomas did not move. Mr. Donald chuckled quietly to himself. He understood now that no amount of waving or speaking loudly would make Thomas salute. The guard's loyalty was to the palace, not to any visitor. Maria walked beside him and explained, "The guards are trained for years to stand without moving. They must be completely focused. Even small gestures like a smile or a wave from visitors do not distract them. Their duty is very serious and they take it very seriously." Mr. Donald listened carefully. He thought about how much patience and self-control it must take to remain so calm for long hours. It made him admire Thomas and the other guards more than he had at first. In the hall, there were many doors leading to different rooms. Maria suggested they visit the library next. Mr. Donald agreed eagerly. The library was large and filled with shelves from floor to ceiling, stacked with books. The smell of old pages and polished wood filled the air. Sunlight came through tall windows, lighting up the colorful book covers. Mr. Donald walked slowly between the shelves, touching some of the books lightly, feeling the texture of history in his hands. He picked up a book about past kings and opened it. The pages showed illustrations of events, ceremonies, and old palace life. He was fascinated by the stories of leaders who had worked hard for their people and the traditions that had been kept for centuries. He realized that leadership was not always about power or control, but about understanding responsibility and respect. He felt a little humbled by the knowledge he was gaining. While exploring the library, Mr. Donald noticed a small group of tourists taking pictures near a statue. They whispered and laughed quietly, trying not to disturb the calm atmosphere. He smiled, feeling more relaxed than he had at the beginning of the day. The palace was not only about strict rules. It was also a place of learning and admiration. He realized that every visitor could enjoy something different, from the beauty of the gardens to the history of the walls, and even the discipline of the guards. When he returned to the main hall, he glanced at Thomas again. The guard's face remained serious, but this time Mr. Donald felt respect instead of frustration. He nodded politely at Thomas, who responded with a small, professional nod. It was a silent acknowledgement that did not break the rules but showed courtesy. Mr. Donald smiled. He understood that even small gestures mattered, and that respect could exist without breaking traditions. As he walked toward the next area of the palace, Mr. Donald felt a new sense of excitement. The palace was much more than a building. It was a place that taught lessons through its walls, its guards, and its history. He wanted to see more, learn more, and enjoy everything this beautiful place had to offer. For the first time, he felt that he was a part of something larger than himself, something timeless and meaningful. After leaving the library, Mr. Donald followed Maria through a long corridor. The walls were lined with old tapestries, each one showing stories of kings, queens, and brave citizens from many years ago. The colors were bright and the details were clear. Every tapestry seemed to tell a story about courage, wisdom, and fairness. Mr. Donald stopped several times to look closely. He felt amazed by the amount of care and effort that went into preserving history. As he walked, he thought about Thomas and the royal guards. At first, he had felt a little frustrated because the guards had not saluted him. Now he understood their purpose. They were symbols of discipline and tradition. Their stillness was not rudeness, but respect for their role. Mr. Donald realized that he could learn from them. Sometimes real strength was not in giving orders, but in patience and consistency. Maria noticed his thoughtful expression and smiled. "Sir, this palace has stood for hundreds of years. The guards, the walls, and the treasures all follow rules that have been passed down through generations. It is a place of respect and learning, not just power." Mr. Donald nodded. He understood now that he was a visitor, not the ruler, and that the palace had its own order. That made him feel both humble and curious. The corridor opened into a large room filled with sunlight. The floors were shiny and the ceiling had golden decorations. In the center, there was a large table with maps of old kingdoms and ancient lands. Mr. Donald walked around it, looking at the maps. He saw how leaders in the past had planned their cities, roads, and defenses. He imagined the decisions they had made and the challenges they had faced. Each map told a story of careful planning and leadership. Nearby, a few tourists were quietly looking at the maps too. Some whispered questions to Maria, and she explained everything politely. Mr. Donald listened and asked many questions as well. He wanted to understand how history shaped the palace and its people. Maria answered with patience, telling stories about kings who were wise, queens who were kind, and citizens who had made a difference. Mr. Donald enjoyed these stories. They made him feel connected to something bigger than himself. After spending some time with the maps, Mr. Donald looked toward the windows. Outside, the palace gardens stretched far and wide. The flowers were bright and the fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Birds flew gracefully across the sky, and the soft sound of water from the fountains made the place feel calm and peaceful. Mr. Donald walked toward the window and watched quietly. He realized that the beauty of the palace was not only inside but also outside, in the gardens and nature. Then, he noticed Thomas again, standing near the main entrance of the hall. The guard's posture was perfect, his eyes forward and his face serious. Mr. Donald smiled and gave a small wave. Thomas did not move, but Mr. Donald felt no frustration this time. He had learned to respect the rules of the palace. The guard's discipline was impressive, and it made the palace feel even more special. Mr. Donald understood that sometimes respect did not need a return gesture. It was shown through understanding and appreciation. Maria led him to another part of the palace where the ceilings were higher and the walls were filled with mirrors. The reflections made the room look even larger. Mr. Donald looked at himself in the mirrors and thought about how he had started the day expecting the guards to salute him. Now he felt different. He realized that visiting the palace was about learning and observing, not about expecting attention. The lesson of patience and respect had started to sink in. As they moved to the next room, Mr. Donald felt excited. There was still so much to see. He looked at the walls, the floors, and the doors, noticing small details he had missed before. Every corner of the palace had a story, and every guard had a purpose. Mr. Donald knew that this visit was not just sightseeing. It was a chance to understand history, culture, and discipline. The day had already taught him a lot, and he was eager to see what lessons were still waiting for him. Mr. Donald followed Maria into a new section of the palace that was completely different from the halls and libraries he had already seen. This part was called the ceremonial hall. It was enormous, with tall ceilings decorated with gold patterns and chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. The walls were covered with paintings of past celebrations, important events, and kings meeting their people. Mr. Donald stopped for a moment to look around, feeling a mixture of awe and curiosity. Every detail seemed carefully planned and full of meaning. The floor of the hall was shiny and reflected the light from the chandeliers. At the center, a long red carpet stretched from one end of the hall to the other. On each side of the carpet, royal guards stood perfectly still. Thomas was there again, tall and serious as always. Mr. Donald remembered how he had expected a salute earlier. This time he only smiled politely and nodded. He understood that the guard's discipline was a form of respect, even if it did not look like what he was used to. Maria explained, "This hall is used for important ceremonies, like welcoming visitors, celebrations, and meetings with the king. The carpet shows the path guests follow, and the guards ensure everything is done properly. Their role is to keep tradition alive." Mr. Donald listened carefully. He could feel the importance of the place. Everything from the carpet to the paintings to the guards had a purpose. He realized that this palace was built not only to be beautiful, but also to teach lessons about order, respect, and history. As they walked along the carpet, Mr. Donald noticed a large throne at the far end of the hall. It was made of gold and decorated with jewels. He could imagine the king sitting there receiving visitors and holding important meetings. The throne seemed powerful but also elegant. Mr. Donald thought about the responsibility of being in such a position. It required wisdom, patience, and respect for tradition. He felt a little humbled thinking about the kings who had walked in this hall before him. Nearby, a few children were visiting with their parents. They looked amazed at the hall and whispered excitedly to each other. Mr. Donald smiled as he watched them. The palace was not only for adults or rulers. It inspired everyone who visited. It reminded him that history and culture were for all people to enjoy and learn from. He felt happy to be part of this experience, even as a visitor. Maria then led him to a small balcony overlooking the gardens. The view was breathtaking. The flowers were bright and colorful, arranged in perfect patterns, and fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Birds flew gracefully above, singing softly. Mr. Donald took a deep breath and felt a sense of calm he had not felt before. The beauty of the gardens, combined with the calm discipline of the guards, created a feeling of peace and order. He thought about Thomas again. The guard had never moved or spoken unnecessarily, but he had done his job perfectly. Mr. Donald realized that discipline and patience could be more impressive than a loud salute or attention. He felt respect for the guard and for the traditions of the palace. This lesson was different from anything he had experienced before, and he appreciated it. After enjoying the view, Mr. Donald returned to the hall and continued exploring. He looked at the walls, the paintings, and the small details that showed the care put into every part of the palace. Each room had its own story, and every guard played a role in keeping those stories alive. Mr. Donald understood that visiting the palace was not about commanding attention, but about observing, learning, and appreciating the effort and history behind everything he saw. By the end of the tour, Mr. Donald felt tired but satisfied. He had learned a lot in just a few hours. He had seen the discipline of the guards, the beauty of the palace, and the importance of history and tradition. For the first time, he understood that respect was earned through consistency and care, not demanded by words or gestures. He smiled, thinking about the lessons he would remember from this visit. The palace had given him more than pictures or memories. It had given him understanding. After spending time in the ceremonial hall and enjoying the balcony view, Mr. Donald followed Maria into another part of the palace. This area was called the audience room. It was smaller than the ceremonial hall, but it had a sense of importance and calm. The walls were decorated with tapestries that told stories of the palace's past rulers. The ceiling had golden designs that reflected the sunlight, giving the room a warm and peaceful feeling. Mr. Donald felt curious about what made this room different from the others. As he looked around, he noticed Thomas standing at the entrance. The guard's posture was perfect, and his face remained serious as always. Mr. Donald remembered how he had wanted a salute earlier in the day. Now he felt differently. He understood that Thomas was showing respect in his own way. Standing still and alert was a form of dedication that could not be easily achieved. Mr. Donald felt admiration for the guard and a sense of calm that he had not felt before. Maria explained, "This room is used when the king meets people privately or for special discussions. The guard's role is to ensure that the meetings happen without interruption. Their presence shows discipline and respect for tradition. They are trained to remain calm, focused, and attentive no matter what is happening around them." Mr. Donald listened carefully. He realized that the palace was not just about beauty or power. It was about order, responsibility, and patience. The audience room had a small table in the center with chairs around it. Mr. Donald walked around and examined the decorations on the walls. He noticed paintings of past kings who were thoughtful and wise. There were also paintings of queens who were kind and fair. Maria explained that each ruler had left lessons behind, and the palace preserved those lessons for future generations. Mr. Donald felt a sense of connection to the history of the palace. He began to think about how leaders could inspire respect through their actions rather than their words. As he continued looking around, a few tourists entered the room quietly. They took pictures and whispered to Maria, asking questions about the paintings and the history of the room. Mr. Donald watched them and smiled. The palace was not only for leaders or rulers. It was for everyone who wanted to learn and appreciate the beauty and history it held. He realized that his own expectations of being noticed were not necessary. What mattered was observing and understanding. Then Maria suggested they visit a small inner garden that was part of the palace. Mr. Donald followed, curious to see another area. The garden was peaceful and quiet, with flowers, fountains, and benches. Birds chirped softly, and the air was fresh and clean. Mr. Donald walked slowly along the stone path, noticing the careful arrangement of the flowers and the sparkling water in the fountains. It was a perfect example of order and beauty working together. While walking, Mr. Donald thought about Thomas again. The guard had never spoken unnecessarily or moved without reason. Yet his presence was powerful. He realized that discipline and patience were forms of strength. Respect was not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was quiet and steady, just like Thomas standing perfectly still in the audience room. Mr. Donald felt a new understanding and appreciation for rules and tradition. As they left the garden and returned to the main hall, Mr. Donald felt calm and happy. He had learned something valuable about patience, respect, and discipline. The palace was teaching him lessons through its walls, its guards, and its beauty. He realized that the day was not about being in charge or demanding attention. It was about experiencing, learning, and appreciating the effort and care behind every detail of the palace. By the end of the visit, Mr. Donald understood that the guards, the walls, and even the smallest decorations had a purpose. They showed history, tradition, and respect. He felt grateful for the experience and excited to see what the rest of the palace would teach him. He was ready for new discoveries, lessons, and moments of admiration. After returning from the inner garden, Mr. Donald followed Maria to a part of the palace he had not yet seen. This area was known as the Gallery of Treasures. The walls were lined with glass cases that displayed objects from the past. There were crowns, jewelry, old coins, and beautifully carved statues. Each item had a small label explaining its history. Mr. Donald walked slowly, reading the labels and looking carefully at each treasure. He felt amazed at how much history was preserved in this place. As he moved from one display to another, he noticed Thomas standing near the entrance of the gallery. The guard's posture was perfect, as always, and his eyes focused straight ahead. Mr. Donald remembered the first moment of the day when he had expected a salute. Now he did not feel frustrated. He felt respect. Thomas was showing commitment and discipline through his stillness. Mr. Donald realized that sometimes being silent and patient could be more impressive than any words or gestures. Maria explained, "These treasures belong to the kings and queens who ruled many years ago. Each piece tells a story about their lives, their decisions, and their care for their people. The guards ensure that these treasures are protected, and their discipline is a part of that protection." Mr. Donald nodded, understanding that the palace was not just about appearances. It was about preserving history, learning from it, and showing respect to the past. He stopped at a display with an old crown decorated with jewels. Maria explained how it had been worn by a wise king who worked hard for his people. Mr. Donald imagined the king standing proudly, making decisions for the good of everyone. He felt a sense of admiration. He realized that leadership was not just about power. It was about responsibility, care, and respect for rules and traditions. He thought about how Thomas and the other guards reflected those values today. Nearby, a group of tourists asked Maria questions about the statues and coins. She answered patiently, explaining the history in simple words so that everyone could understand. Mr. Donald listened quietly, enjoying the way she made the stories come alive. He noticed how the tourists were excited and curious, just like he had been at the beginning of the day. The palace was not only beautiful, but also full of lessons that anyone could learn from. After exploring the gallery, Maria suggested they visit the palace tower. Mr. Donald followed eagerly. The tower was tall and offered a view of the entire palace grounds. As they climbed the stairs, Mr. Donald felt his excitement grow. He could see the gardens, fountains, and courtyards from above. The sunlight reflected off the golden rooftops, making the palace look magical. He took a deep breath, feeling both happy and peaceful. When they reached the top, Thomas was waiting at the entrance to the tower room. He remained still and alert as always. Mr. Donald looked at him and smiled. He waved lightly, and Thomas responded with a small nod, showing polite acknowledgement without breaking his rules. Mr. Donald realized that respect could exist without loud gestures. A simple nod, a calm presence, or quiet discipline could communicate as much as words or actions. From the top of the tower, Mr. Donald could see the surrounding city and the countryside beyond. The palace looked like the heart of a vast living story. He felt grateful for the opportunity to visit and learn. The day had taught him about patience, respect, history, and beauty. It had shown him that leadership and admiration were earned through dedication and care, not demanded through words or gestures. As they descended the tower, Mr. Donald felt calm and reflective. He looked at Thomas one last time and gave a polite nod. Thomas's small acknowledgement made Mr. Donald smile. He understood that even small moments could carry important lessons. The palace had given him more than sightseeing experiences. It had given him understanding, admiration, and a new perspective on discipline and respect. As the day began to come to an end, Mr. Donald walked slowly toward the main gate of the palace. He felt calm, happy, and full of thoughts. The palace had given him more than he had expected. He had seen its beauty, learned about its history, and understood the importance of discipline and respect. Every part of the palace, from the grand halls to the small gardens, had shown him lessons about patience, humility, and admiration. Thomas, the royal guard, stood at the gate as he had done throughout the day. His posture was perfect, his expression serious, and his eyes focused straight ahead. Mr. Donald remembered the first moment of the day when he had expected Thomas to salute him. Now he smiled. He no longer wanted the guard to salute. He had learned that respect did not need to be demanded. It could exist quietly through discipline, focus, and dedication. Maria walked beside Mr. Donald, smiling. She noticed how calm he seemed now, compared to the excitement and impatience he had shown earlier. "Sir," she said gently, "the palace teaches many lessons. It is not only about the past, but also about understanding patience, respect, and care. The guards, the walls, and even the gardens all have something to teach those who observe carefully." Mr. Donald nodded. He realized she was right. The palace had shown him that leadership and admiration came from understanding and appreciation, not from expecting attention. He looked around at the palace grounds one last time. The gardens were still bright with flowers. The fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and the birds flew gracefully across the sky. He felt a deep sense of peace. The palace had not only impressed him with its beauty, but had also taught him lessons about life. He thought about Thomas and the other guards, and he felt respect for their dedication. Standing still and focused for hours was not easy, yet they did it every day without complaint. Mr. Donald stopped for a moment and gave Thomas a polite nod. Thomas responded with a small professional nod of acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but it carried meaning. Mr. Donald smiled and felt a sense of connection. He understood that respect could be quiet and steady. It did not always need loud words or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it was shown through presence, discipline, and consistency. As he walked toward the exit, he thought about everything he had learned that day. He remembered the paintings of past kings and queens, the beautiful tapestries, the treasures in the gallery, and the calm beauty of the gardens. He remembered the lessons about patience, humility, and respect. Most of all, he remembered the discipline of the royal guards. Their calm and steady presence had taught him more than any words could. When Mr. Donald reached the palace gate, he turned and looked back one last time. The palace stood tall and magnificent, glowing in the late afternoon sun. He felt gratitude for the experience. The palace had given him not only memories but also understanding. He realized that visiting such a place was not about being noticed or commanding attention. It was about observing, learning, and appreciating the history and the people who maintained it. Maria walked beside him and said, "I hope your visit has been enjoyable, sir. There is always something new to learn in the palace, even for those who visit many times." Mr. Donald nodded. He had enjoyed the day more than he had expected. The palace had shown him beauty, history, and the quiet strength of discipline. He knew he would remember these lessons for a long time. As he left the palace, he felt a sense of satisfaction and peace. He understood that the true value of the visit was not in commanding attention, but in understanding and respecting the traditions and people of the palace. Thomas and the other guards had taught him an important lesson. Respect, discipline, and patience were more powerful than any display of authority. Mr. Donald took one last look at the palace, smiling. The day had been a journey of discovery, admiration, and learning. He felt grateful for every moment. The palace had left an impression on him that he would never forget. Walking away, he carried not only memories of beauty and history, but also the quiet lessons of patience, respect, and understanding. The experience had changed him, and he knew that these lessons would guide him in the future.